Hi everyone, in this video we're going to go through the math of why a monopolist has a marginal revenue curve that is less than their demand curve. And we're going to start by comparing and contrasting the marginal revenue and demand of a perfectly competitive firm. So let's just focus on these two columns here, the quantity and price. So if we notice that as quantity goes up, the price never changes. So we would draw that as a perfectly elastic demand curve. So for this firm in this kind of a market, it doesn't matter how much they sell, the price never changes. This is a perfectly competitive firm. It's in a perfectly competitive industry. So this is why their marginal revenue never changes. Every unit they sell, it's always going to be the same. So I'm going to tweak this column right here, and instead of having price being a constant, I'm going to have price for this firm being a demand curve. Right? So I'm going to replace this with mathematical function that is downward sloping. Now, if you look carefully at this column, you can see that now as the quantity increases, the price does change. Right? Price goes down as the quantity increases. So if we wanted to sketch what that looked like, it would look roughly like this. In fact, you even can see here at a price of $60, the quantity demanded is 0. So we even have an intersection point there. Now, if you look very carefully at some of these other columns too, you'll note that nothing has changed except that column, at least until we get to marginal revenue, but the costs haven't changed, right? So if this was a identical firm in terms of what it costs them to produce a good, but the only difference is now this firm exists in a monopoly market instead of a perfect competition industry, then there's going to be some changes that happen. And the first big change is that, yes, our demand curve is downward sloping, but if you look at this marginal revenue curve, it's also downward sloping. And again, the intuition behind that is that when I lower my price, I can't just lower my price on the last good, I have to lower it on every good I sell. So my marginal revenue curve is going to be downward sloping too, but also at every possible quantity, right? Every possible quantity except for that very first one. Look at that. The second quantity, my price is 58. Second quantity, my price is 57. For that 7th unit, my price is $53. Let's look at this price. My price for 7 units is $53. Let's make that black to match. But my marginal revenue for that 7th unit is only $47. Now, I did something with this demand curve to make it pretty easy to see some other pattern that I'd like you to know about. Notice that every time quantity goes up by 1, price goes down by 1, right? So the slope of this demand curve is -1. But over here, every time quantity goes up by 1, the marginal revenue goes down by 2. So the slope of this curve is -2. And that's actually true anytime we have a linear demand curve. Anytime we have a linear demand curve, that means that the marginal revenue curve is also going to be downward sloping. So a downward sloping linear demand means marginal revenue is downward sloping, but at twice the rate of the demand curve. So the slope of this marginal revenue curve is twice of what it is for the demand curve. So let's put all these costs and demand and marginal revenue curves together in our next video so we could see what it looks like to be a profit maximizer in a monopoly.